Yeah, we're live. It is 4 on the nose. so that means it's 7 o'clock somewhere. I'm Richard Holdner. This is the live feed. Today we're going to talk about the video that I posted today, which is a comparison video, a cool intake comparison. My second favorite thing, forced induction being first, and then intakes, and then you combine those two. That's awesome. So the video was comparing two very, very short runner intake manifolds, which are commonly used for guys. The Holley high ram, or the Holley low ram rather, versus the Brian Tooley Racing Trinity intake manifold. Both fairly short. I don't know, somewhere near 4 inches. I think I'm not sure. I remember measuring them, but very short runners designed for high RPM. They were making peak power at 7,600 or so in this test. So this was our stock bottom end junkyard L33 that we've beaten the snot out of and run it endlessly. I don't know how many runs. I need to go back and count how many pulls that this thing has on. I know it's got to be 100 or more. And we want to talk a little bit about why people or whether or not people should choose these and why they would pick this type of manifold over something else. Because even given how long I've been preaching the long runner, short runner thing, and for every engine family, a Honda, the LS, small block Chevys, big block Chevys, modular Fords, all the things. When I don't know how many times I've run this test, and I did this first, I don't know, 30 plus years ago. And to show people what it does, because I'm guilty of this too, especially before you test something and before you know what the reality is, and especially after you test it 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 times, and you go, hey, look, this always does this. This is like when I drop something, it always falls because gravity does what gravity does. This is the same kind of thing. And so, I'm surprised that the information that's out there, even after showing people, hey, look, this longer runner manifold made more power in this RPM range than the short runner manifold. Yeah, but I like the short. Then the comment that I get is, yeah, but I like the short one to enhance low speed power. I'm like, I just want to shake you. You're not getting it. And a similar thing happens with the exhaust too. They're like, oh no, I want to run the stock exhaust manifolds or shorty so I can add low speed power. Like, yeah, but that's not really how it works. It doesn't work that way on either end, on the intake or the exhaust. You do not pick up low speed power from a short runner intake manifold. You do not pick up low speed power from shorty headers. You get that from long tube headers, and you get it from a long intake manifold. But this test was both of these are short manifolds, and because they're direct marketplace competitors, it's kind of a good test for people to find out, hey, if I'm looking at both of these, which one of these would I pick if we were basing it just on power? Quite honestly, the difference between power of these two, the Brian Tooley Racing intake, as a spoiler alert, if you haven't watched the video, did a little better. But you'd really have to nitpick, what's going on. 5 or 6 horsepower, but not all the way through the curve, in some selected spots along the curve, and then a little bit more peak power. So technically it is better, but not enough so that, and I didn't look this up to see what they were selling for. Holley, I know, is having a sale at Holley.com. So if you want to go over to Holley, maybe you'll find a high ram or a low ram, on some sort of sale price. But I think that Brian Tooley Racing is also doing a sale going on right now in honor of our holiday time for Christmas. So you could get one for yourself for Christmas and put it in your stocking or whatever. But I think that, like we've talked about before with a lot of other things, and particularly camshafts, because even now I constantly get this, oh yeah, you got to get a tight LSA. I'm like, yeah, but that's not why people buy cams. And it's the same thing with this intake test. Is like, somebody's going to buy this intake. There are lots of people who would purchase these short runner intake manifolds because they fit. So, like a truck intake manifold or a high ram intake manifold, it's just too tall. It doesn't fit in the tight confines of whatever engine compartment or hood line that they have. So if it doesn't fit, it's not a choice unless you're going to cut your hood or put a cowl hood on it. But that's an order of magnitude above just doing an intake swap. So a lot of guys are not going to do that. So then you're looking at intakes that fit. And so guys would put these manifolds on there. Another reason that they would get these, even though they should maybe get a fast or something. And I pointed that out in the video that, hey, look, if you're building something lesser than what we had there, something less than a 7,600 RPM, 550 horsepower, 5.3 liter, because that's a pretty healthy motor. If you're building something less than that and you have a truck Norris cam in it and you got stock heads on it and you want an intake manifold for it, I don't recommend these manifolds because they're not going to do what you want them to do. They're not going to be optimized. All you're going to do is hurt low speed power, where the other two things, the cylinder heads and the intake manifold, want to make power. And so you should combine something that wants to make power as an intake in those same RPM ranges, and you'll be much happier. You'll be much happier with a longer runner intake manifold. But despite that, guys would still buy these manifolds because they look awesome. I mean, and I think particularly the Brian Tooley Racing intake manifold, it seems to be in the comments that that's visually more pleasing to people. And again, that's wholly subjective, but still, guys get that because it fits under the hood, and two, that it looks cool, and that's good enough reason. You pop the hood, you go, hey, look at that. Yeah, that's a truck manifold. That's one of maybe the ugliest intake manifolds ever. Or you pop the hood and go, hey, look. They're like, oh yeah, that's a Brian Tooley Racing Trinity intake manifold. That thing looks awesome. Sometimes that's enough, giving them a ride and having a loss of torque because it's a short runner manifold compared to the truck or the Fast or the Trailblazer SS that should be in there. If you had a combination that had like a truck Norris cam or something like that in there, that would be a better choice. You'd be much happier. And the thing is, you'd be much happier for 90% of the driving. If you get a short runner manifold and it makes more power from 7,000 on out, for your truck, that's probably not a good call. But for this particular motor, it is a good call. And one of the things I wanted to point out that I didn't mention in the video is that these are pretty good combinations for and in fact, this is going to be the poll. Is it actually a good combination for a centrifugal supercharger? And so we'll do the pluses and minuses here. But that will be our poll though. Okay, so is a short runner intake that favors high RPM a good choice for a centrifugal supercharger? So here's the logic behind that. Centrifugal superchargers don't make a lot of boost down low, and therefore they don't make a lot of power down low. They do very well at higher engine speeds because that's the boost goes up with RPM. So more RPM, more boost, more power. And this is important because more RPM in this case is kind of the same as changing the pulley. So if you were running it to 6,000 RPM and now you're running it to 7,000 RPM, you have 1,000 RPM multiplied by the pulley ratio and the internal step. So now you might have, I don't know, 5 or 10,000 more RPM, more impeller speed, more RPM in impeller speed, which could translate to a lot of boost. I mean, it could be a bunch. It could be 3 or 4 or 5 PSI, which is going to make a big difference. Plus, you're at a higher engine speed, which is going to make more power up there. So having a combination like this 5.3 and combining it with a centrifugal blower and running it out at high RPM, as long as you can obviously don't have belt slip, because that would be a concern. But if you don't have belt slip, the power keeps rising. The boost, it continues to increase with boost. The boost continues to increase with RPM. The power continues to increase with RPM. And so if we run more RPM, that's good. It should be more RPM, should be more power, right? That's the plus side. So the downside is that, well, what if we did this? What if we put a longer runner intake manifold with a centrifugal supercharger to allow the combination to make more low and mid-range power where the centrifugal supercharger is kind of suffering? And then we allow the centrifugal supercharger to increase the airflow and the boost production with RPM and artificially increase the power output and the peak RPM where peak power occurs even using a long runner intake manifold, because you can do that too. Because that's what happens if you, for instance, if you have a 5.3 with a mild cam and it makes peak power at 6,100, if you put a centrifugal supercharger in there on there and combine it with that NA combination and have a rising boost curve, which you will on a centrifugal blower, you're going to push peak power RPM up higher than 6,100. It might go up 500 RPM. It might go up more than that. But it'll continue to, because you've artificially increased the VE because you have a rising boost curve. You're supplying more and more airflow, so the motor goes, hey, look, I'm still happy. I'm still getting all the airflow that I need, and we're making lots and lots of power. So is that situation better, where we have more low speed power and still have a lot of high speed power ish? So let me know what you guys think on the poll there. But both of these manifolds were cool because they, like I said, similar kind of results. Short runner deal, high RPM. We're, running the thing out fairly well, at least to its power peak in these combinations on this 5.3. And both of them pretty popular for choices for this kind of application, especially for a guy trying to run these kinds of engine speeds, like for a drag race deal with turbos on it, or like we said, with a blower. If you're doing that and you have something that, a low hood line that you want this thing to fit under the hood, pretty good choice. It gives you lots of RPM to play with, which could mean lots and lots of power, because you can, and along with a centrifugal, if you put a turbo on it, you could also create a rising boost curve with a turbo by manipulating, hopefully, a rising boost curve, because you can generate that. You can generate boost with RPM on a lot of these, programmable boost control deals, not with a manual knob, obviously, and that would be a more function of what turbo you've picked and what the wastegates are and how they're operating and stuff. But you could produce a rising boost curve with an electronic boost controller, as long as you can control it relative to RPM, which works good. And then you can do what a centrifugal does. It's just that you'd have a lot more mid-range power when the turbo came up, because it's going to come up and make more boost before a centrifugal supercharger does. So it's a lot of cool stuff. So the short runner stuff is cool. I think for at least the people that are watching this, the vast majority of them are not that. I don't think that's and I could be wrong about the audience, but the racers, I think, tend to not come here for their decision making. And so if they're running 7,500 to 8,000 RPM on their applications, although they might be interested in what these results are if they're choosing one of these manifolds for that kind of combination, it's good to have the data to go, hey, look, this one, if they're the same price and one of them makes a little more than the other, that's obviously a better choice. And then also we talked earlier about some of the considerations for which one of these things you're going to pick. Another consideration might be just who do you get along with, who has good customer service, who has the thing in stock, what is the price. There are these other things that would definitely be a consideration, in addition to wiggling around or arguing about 5 or 6 horsepower, whatever. So we'll see what you guys got going on this lovely Tuesday. This Tuesday, right? Oh, it's Monday. There you go. Let's talk about intakes. And the trick flow guys still can't get the small block forward box intake back on the market. Who needs a hood? Yeah, I think most guys do. We got you up on the shop. Yeah, what's up? Shop talk. I've got the polished John Lingenfelter intake on the 6-liter. But I've had it on an 8,000 RPM 4.8 and a couple of 5.3 there. So yeah, it's going to be a little out of its element at 8,000 RPM. That what was that? I think that was a Hawaiian piece, right? That Lingenfelter put his name on. I've tested those before. Polish it mainly for looks. Yeah. Did you put if you're running boost on it, did you put a thicker plate on the bottom of it? Remember the Engine Masters where they tested Freiberger's tunnel ram and how disappointed he was with the results? Why was he disappointed with the results? The tunnel ram added a ton of power on the boosted application. smart people analyze your information for their choices. There is a lot of data there. That's for sure. But just like everything else, when you give them some or give them the information, what if you did this? What if you did this? What if you did this? Why didn't we get this bit of information? Why didn't the free ice cream you gave me also have sprinkles on it? I think that they were out of sprinkles on that day. He was disappointed how it dropped off at higher RPM. The tunnel ram, are you talking about the tunnel ram on the blown big block? How do you think the top with dual throttle bodies would do on the low ram? It would do exactly the same as it's doing, because the power output of that intake manifold, if we ran into a flow problem with which we have like on the high ram, the dual throttle bodies tended to make a little bit more power on the high ram when I tested it. So if you have an airflow issue with the single throttle body, I don't know that we're there yet on the 5.3 with a 105 millimeter single throttle body. But it won't do anything really to the curve in terms of, it's not going to change the runner length. 26 degrees in Wisconsin. Nice. Wine intake. Yeah. Been running at NA for a decade. 78 Firebird drift burnout car. Reliable horsepower. Yeah. I've tested those a whole bunch. And because that was one of the first ones to come out, we tested those way back. Sending out a message here. I remember people talking about, especially with those wine intake manifolds, the plate on the bottom of it. I remember people talking about deforming those plates and then blowing them off on a nitrous backfire, which you could destroy a plastic manifold with a composite manifold. And so if you hurt the plate, you just think about that like as a burst plate, then it's okay. As long as it didn't damage it and doesn't stop you from bolting it on. But a lot of guys just go with a thicker material there, and that works out pretty good. It's a 75 millimeter throttle body, which I bored out to 85. Okay. That should help with the flow going into it. I don't know how well the runner length is and that stuff going on in there. Same thing with the BBK is like that. I think if I look back at the intake test, I think a lot of those cast aluminum manifolds like that were pretty similar. We didn't test anything with a throttle body mod on it though. And the 75 millimeter throttle opening the power output of your test motor on an NA one, if it's a blow through deal, you don't have to worry about that. But if it's a NA one and you put it on a 500 horsepower motor, stock throttle body is probably going to be close to being okay for that. But if you did it on a 600 horsepower motor, that's going to be restrictive. CJ, you're all about the being polished. I shipped off the 2 M90 blower housings today to the guys at Joker. So I'm excited for them to get those and see what the results are. I also want to do either powder coating or I'd like to do a hydro dip. So if anybody knows somebody that does that, that would be cool. Give me some information. My son and I might try it and we'll see how that works out, because you can buy the screens for that. And I think it needs to be an American flag, right? Something like that. Now it makes me, I want to look up that. Let's see the Wyan intake manifold. Cathedral port results, 6 liter. LS intake shootout. There we go. Victor Jr. Final wind, and then we'll see what it is versus the, I think our baseline, our baseline intake was an LS1, which is obviously just awful. It made more power than the LS1 did, which is good, which kind of what we would expect. 566 versus 535. Yeah. It's 30 horsepower better than stock. That's pretty good. I don't know if that, I'm kind of curious to see how it does for like an LS6 intake manifold. It's better than an LS6, than a factory LS6 too. That's good. And then the other one I wanted to look at was the BBK intake manifold. Final BBK. BBK was just a touch better. Just a touch better on the big end. It's from about 5,700 on out. It was a little better. So, but very comparable. Unless you had a back-to-back direct test, you wouldn't be able to tell. Sloppy stage 2 can with a BTR dual spring and titanium retainer kit on a 6-liter currently. Okay, that's a good one. Does a company that made the adapters for the Ford Supercharger for an LS still make them? Yeah, that's Tom DeMuse did that, and he still makes those. Yeah, so you can put the 122 blowers from the GT500s on the LS using a Holley low ram or a Holley high ram. You got to ram it up. 26 degrees in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's like Czechoslovakia. That's good boost weather though, right? Excited for the M90 stuff. Currently L32 swapping an 03 limited edition Grand Prix, which was NA. Motor's going in right now. So what are you taking out of there? Is it an L36 that you're taking out? Tim, the M12, which I haven't run the M or the M122. Is that you're talking about? I never ran one of the GT500 blowers. I only ran that 2.3 liter Ford racing blower on it. 26 degrees here in North Dakota. Would you need the adapter for using a low ram? Yeah, you need that flange. You need either the low ram or the high ram is just going to raise the point of where the blower is, raise or lower that. The adapter plate is designed to work with that flange on that intake manifold. You need a lower intake manifold. The Milwaukee impact driver. Oh yeah, for the intake swaps. Yep. I know, and mine's not even an 18 volt one. I have the small battery on mine, but I like it because I don't use it to take bolts off. I usually undo them with a ratchet or something, and then use it to just zing them off. I don't ever impact them on. I don't use that for the final tightening sequence. How's our poll doing? 81% in the yes column. Is a short runner intake that favors higher RPM a good choice for a centrifugal supercharger? 81% saying yes. Yeah, Tim, I just want because the vibration of the gun is actually what makes the electronics go out in it. So if you're not hammering on the thing all the time, I just think it's better for it. 23 WRX doesn't care if it's cold out. The E-gate targets a torque and not a boost level. My boost is like 3 PSI lower in September. Just came across the Eaton 122 supercharger. The one from the GT500s. Vern, so you want your intake to be a little bit longer than that? A little longer than what? That's the problem with saying short run or long run or stuff, is you don't know what that short and long is all a relative thing. So from the XLR Cadillac, those adapter plates were done by the guys at what was it, Mac Daddy Parts or something. I don't know if those are still available. Somebody else may be doing those, but I don't think, I think that those guys only ran a limited number of those and then sold them all out. 40 degrees in Florida. I heard Florida was getting a bunch of rain though, or there is it you guys have a big storm going on there? Not that all of Florida necessarily needs to have a big storm going on. Richard, I just watched your low RPM torque video. I have a stick. Oh, so you wanna load it at 600 RPM? The rain stopped yesterday and it was the whole. Oh, it was the whole state. Okay. Boost at 600 RPM is not a good idea, even with a manual trans. It will be problematic. It is boost weather though. I loved on my 5-liter Mustang with the Vortec on it. That was the nice thing about going to the Silver State, is that when you'd go, because they had it twice a year, and so when you'd go on the cold time, which I think was around September, May was a little warmer, but September could be cold, especially in the morning. If you were one of the first guys off the line, it could be cold, and it loved it. And when we go out at night, if it's 25 or 30 degrees outside, it's it really loved that, because my Vortec was not intercooled, so it liked it. Ben, yeah, you can do some research on that, on the different forms of charge filling. I have a really good book on it. It was written by an SAE engineer. The Vortec 4.3 liter Vortec Turbo 4.3 liter Vortec loves this weather in Minnesota. Yeah, I bet. Non-intercooled stuff is even better. Richard, when you do cam tests on small bores, you pay attention to the intake manifold vacuum at idle. Only if that's specifically part of the test. If I'm just doing a power thing, then I don't pay attention to that. I don't spend time making the thing idle. We're getting some rain here too. California is supposed to get a bunch of rain, I think. Yeah, the dogs are happy. That's because mom's home. They're very excited when mom comes home. Yeah, they're jumping around, and one of them likes to grab my arm and take me to wherever I'm supposed to go with him. I found that to be common with the golden retrievers. Our other two dogs that we had, our other two goldens that we had before we got these puppies, that one of them passed away. That was Maya, but she loved doing the same thing. She would grab my arm, and I don't know, that was her way of showing that she was excited to see me. Got some snow in Kentucky. Have you done any testing with quick spool valves on larger turbos to compare before and after, as well as the smaller turbo spool times? A quick spool valve is something that we best tested on a chassis dyno, or a, really out on the street. An engine dyno is not really a good place to test that. Your German Shepherd does that? Yeah, it's common. Why does one use a colder plug for more power? You don't normally use colder plugs for more power. You use colder plugs to help eliminate potential detonation. Non-intercooled 4.3 Vortec with 13 to 15 feet of charge pipe. There you go. No BOV and all the flutter. Good. Have you tested the Amazon sheet metal manifold on a 5.3? I don't know specifically which one you're talking about. If you're talking about the sniperish ones, I've run those fabricated manifolds before. Milo's doing good. He's so easygoing. He likes wrestling, and Bruno likes wrestling with him because Bruno wants to be the new man of the house. He wants to be the alpha dog, and Milo just like laughs at him. Of one of those dogs too. He's a pit and he likes to grab your sleeve and walk around. Yeah, he did. They do. Here, come over here. I want to show you something. They are awesome. I did the gentleman who asked about the spark plugs, Ben. I did a video and we did testing on plug ranges, on heat ranges, just specifically on power. Not what we had was a motor that wasn't going to detonate with either one of the plugs, because it was an NA motor. But we ran different heat ranges and it did nothing to power. Like most of the testing that I did with spark plugs, they just do nothing to power unless you get misfire, and that's not unusual for like excessive plug gap on boosted applications. How long can lawn runners be before they jump a shark? You'd be surprised how long they ran that Skyram. That was pretty long. If anyone wants specifics, I use galvanized fence post 2 3/8 for a charge pipe. Hey, you got to use what you have, man. Richard, I don't know how I would know an answer to this, but why is the Edelbrock Pro Flow for an L3 so hard to get? What's up with Edelbrock if it's under the hoods where the high ram doesn't? So the Pro Flow actually fits and the high ram does not on an LS3. I didn't know that, but I don't know why they're not making them. That is a good intake manifold. In fact, when I've tested them, the Pro Flow makes almost identical power to the high ram. The cross ram was pretty long, yeah. Uh-oh, Eric's headed out for dinner. Getting some burgers, getting your burger on. I just had some pizza. Pizza. I went out and did some shopping today. Helped the economy. Spent some money. Spent some of those, both of those YouTube bucks. Can a port length be simulated in front of the throttle body? Anything that's happening in front of the throttle body is not runner length unless it's an IR manifold where the throttle body is somewhere in the runner. But after you go to the common plenum and then you have a throttle body, anything that's in front of that is actually Helmholtz resonance and not reflected wave. Short runner intake, how short is runner we're talking about? On the test that I did today, they're about 4 inches probably. BS, can I clarify what? Anything that happens in front of the throttle body, like you have an intake manifold and then a common plenum where all the runners come up to, like this high ram, a low ram, a truck Norris, any kind of intake manifold. And then you have the throttle body. Anything that happens before the throttle body, like on the air intake out to a mass air or out to a cold air or whatever, anything that happens there is not runner length. That's something else. That's another form of charge filling that's much less effective. Have you ever played around with other types of fuels? Not nitromethane yet, but we want to. I feel like I've arrived now in BS. It's a short acronym for me so that I don't have to say people's full names. Mostly because of some of these, I don't know what they are, and I can't can't pronounce them very well. Have you tested the mid-rise manifold? Yes. I wouldn't expect it to land right in the middle because it's not the same design. It's not a manifold that has runner length that's between a low ram and a high ram. The low ram and the high ram are pretty similar in design, except for the runner length. The mid ram is not that. It's different. But is it effective in front of the throttle body? It can be. You have a beer available anytime you find yourself in North Carolina. That would be great, except I don't really drink beer. That's not my thing. Get something a little stronger, I'm up for that. I'm assuming swapping the L33 in an L6 car, I will have more power and a higher stall with no trans or converter changes. That's right. Or at least I'm hoping, yep, that should be true. Apparently flex plates are different. Use the L32 plate. Okay. Yeah, you should have a lot more low speed power and therefore more, more stall speed. Proper scotch. That's fine. Yeah. All of that is good. 75% are saying yes, centrifugal blowers. Combine that with boost. Centrifugal, the boost from a centrifugal blower with a short runner intake manifold, then you have the best of both worlds. I did that on one particular application. The engine didn't belong to me; it belonged to an editor guy who the editors get all the free stuff sent to them. I'm not complaining. I obviously have had my share, but they get all the engines and stuff. But he put together a 5.3 with airflow research heads and a cam and all kinds of cool stuff. But he put a Pro Charger on there, and then we did what I was talking about. We ran a high ram on it, and then we ran it. We just kept running out more and more RPM to get to the number. We wanted to make 1,000 horsepower with it, and it did do that. It did it at 7,000 or 71 or 7,200 or something. So if a single throttle, then the tube above the throttle will act as a longer runner. No, no. The only thing that is runner is from the cylinder head up to the common plenum. That's runner. Once the common plenum is there, anything in front of the common plenum, by in front of, I mean throttle body, air intake out to atmosphere, none of that is runner. The only thing that's runner is the stuff that's attached to the head between the cylinder head and the plenum. Is he referring to adding length between the throttle body as an intake, an extension tube, moving it away from creating more plenum volume? I'm not sure. I'm trying to get that clarified here. LSX, I saw the video that Cletus did. Has anyone ever played around with sequencing intake runners to maximize pulse waves, similar to tuned exhaust, but on the intake side? You mean changing firing order? Is that what you're thinking of? You need to look up, Ben, you need to go look up reflected waves. You need to go look up inertial ram, and you need to go look up Helmholtz resonance. And the firing order thing that you're talking about is scavenging on the exhaust side, but that's not what needs to happen on the intake side. I'm working on a Fiero. I picked up a 2.8 liter V6. I was in the process of a carb swap. I finished it, but would someone carb swap the stock 2.8? But why would someone carb swap the stock 2.8? Is there even a carbureted manifold for it, or are you just welding a carb flange to some EFI intake manifold? Would a vacuum pump have made a difference on the 5.3? I think so. I think it definitely would. We have some blow by on that motor because it's old and it has questionable ring seal and stuff. Can a plenum be placed above the throttle bodies then? Well, you need to describe what sort of induction system you're talking about. Generic statements like that get me confused because I don't know what you're envisioning. So you got to tell me exactly what you're envisioning. Where is the cylinder head? Where is the runner? Where is the plenum? Where is the throttle body? Or do you have multiple throttle bodies? What is it you're trying to do? Edelbrock Torker 2 on a 2.8. Oh, they make something like that? 243 versus 706 on a 5.3 BTR stage 3 cam. Want to make 1,000 horsepower turbocharge. Which head is the best? There's nothing to choose from between those two. They both will do. You won't see any difference between those two. Just pick the cylinder head that you have, because either one of those will work. Either one of those will make 1,000. You can make 1,000 horsepower with any cathedral port, any stock cathedral port head. In fact, I would suggest going to a smaller camshaft too. Obviously, don't want to play guessing games too long. Don't want to wash cylinders or blow the intake off. Will the factory ECM have enough leeway to start and not hurt it? So, Sierra, what was your question beforehand? Is that the first question or? Okay, here we go. On a new engine that is drastically more performance-oriented than stock, what is the best way to approach the initial tune setup using the factory ECM, like initial break-in parameter? Well, a break-in, especially if you have a factory ECU and you have a sealed exhaust like you do, and all of that stuff works, the fact that you have put a camshaft in it or cylinder heads or whatever you've done to it, intake manifold, I don't know what you've done to it, a break-in procedure is all going to be at very low engine speeds, and it's going to be all under closed loop. So you should be able to do that with the tune that you have. You should be able to break the motor in by cycling up and down, never getting to full throttle. I'm talking about running like a quarter throttle. You can go do that. You can go drive that around and put miles on it if that's the way you're going to do it, or do it on a chassis dyno, or however you're going to do it. That will all work out. Then you have to go have it tuned on a chassis dyno if it's in the car. I was thinking facing one intake port at the other, so reflected waves fire back into another intake port as opening. Yeah, no, you don't want to do that, because a reflected wave that comes up, the first reflected wave that comes up is a negative pressure wave. So you don't want that going into another port. It's a negative pressure wave that causes a positive pressure wave to reflect back. That's why they call it a reflected wave. So you don't want to do that. Stop thinking about cross bogenation between the runners. Get the runner length right. If you get the runner length right, you've done 99% of what you need to do with the intake manifold. A trick for higher premium vacuum in a boosted application is a catch can with the outside ran to the turbo inlet. Not sure the 5.3 you guys mentioned, but I wouldn't recommend drawing crankcase air back into the turbo. I don't recommend that. I don't want to have oil vapor going back into the motor. Cylinder head, intake port, runner, throttle valve, runner, plenum, single tube, MAF tube filter. Okay, so if you have, it seems to me what you're describing there is an individual runner intake manifold with individual throttle bodies on it, individual throttle valves, but then also runner on top of where that valve is. So all that is just runner. It doesn't matter where that valve is if you have a whole bunch of them. If you have individual, like if you have 8 throttle valves for a V8 engine, all of that is still just runner. Then you have common plenum. And then everything in front of that common plenum, that's all Helmholtz resonance. The length of that runner, doesn't matter if it has a valve in it, the length of that runner is a reflected wave and inertial ram. The 2.8 liter FR runs, it's leaking oil from the intake manifold bolts, but the car came with everything to swap the factory intake back on. Never had an issue with it, been doing it for years. That's great, but it still ingests, you're still ingesting oil vapor into the motor, and the detonation threshold for oil vapor is much, much lower than it is for the gas mixture that you're putting in there. So you're making the combination more prone to detonation by doing that. Could you retest the ported fast 102 on the L33 with the bigger LS3 cam? Interested to see how the fast does with the bigger cam. No, I can't. I don't have that intake manifold anymore. That intake manifold belonged to Brian Tooley, and he just sent it out so I could run the test on the when we were doing the upgrade on it, and then I sent it back to him because that's actually on a car. It's on a vehicle driving around. I think it's driving around now. That might be one of their track Corvettes or something. Is the short runner intake that favors high RPM a good choice for a centrifugal supercharger? We got 35 votes, 71%. Yes. Now we got to establish is there a diminishing return point to the length of runners. The length of the runner is going to determine the effective operating range. So if you're talking about your combination where you only want to rev to 4,500 RPM, you're going to want pretty long runners. Like look at a tune port motor, for instance. That's the kind of runner length you're going to want on your combination. Don't worry about intake port flow, volume, cubic inches, all that. Just you and a lot of these things on your combination might be irrelevant anyways because you might not be able to have the runner length that you want. So let's go. Is a short runner intake that favors high RPM a good choice for a centrifugal supercharger? We're going to end our poll 72% saying yes. We'll go from top chat to live chat for a little bit before I got to go. I bought the car with a carbureted intake on a Holley already. I did the intake bolts one at a time, silicone them. Sierra ignition module, then the injectors won't turn on, and some shade tree mechanic. Let's see. Oh. What intake would be good for a 6-liter in the 6,500 to 7,000 range? I'm not sure if the Trailblazer intake would get there. A fast would be better for that. Scrolling. NA doesn't really matter whether it's NA or, I mean, it would matter a little bit if it's a centrifugal blower, but if it's a turbo deal, I guess it does matter because things are going to change, not because of the presence of boost, but because centrifugal blower has a rising boost curve, so that changes where the thing makes peak power. And if you put a positive displacement blower on there, you're changing the intake manifold and putting a shorter runner on there, and that's going to change where it makes peak power. So only the turbo, if you keep the boost the same, will that be the same as the NA motor? Gamers. I didn't know there was a 2.8 liter intake manifold, carbureted intake manifold available. CJ, does it run with EFI stuff on it? Did we ever figure out if a curved runner or a straight runner is better than the other? Well, are you looking for like absolutes, or if you have a slightly curved runner and a straight runner, if they're the same length, the reflected wave is going to be the same. The power is going to occur at the same RPM. Guys could argue about the airflow of the runner, but again, like a lot of things, it depends. If you have a runner that flows 300 CFM, but you only need 250, then you have way more flow than you need. The fact that it went down by 1% or whatever it went based on the turn, is kind of irrelevant. Kind of get some or most of the benefit of a cathedral port by making everything above the very long port throttle in the shape of that cathedral. You don't need to change the port shape. So is that why a lot of these car companies are putting the charger underneath the plenum to keep the runners long? Yeah, if you can package the blower low, and then like on a Hemi, because of where the facing is on the cylinder heads for the runner, and Edelbrock did this, and actually Ford did this on that 462 valve deal, where you have the runners come up and then they can be long. And if you have more runner length, you're going to make more average power. BS, it's not really a momentum thing, which is why the curve one doesn't flow as well. There's a restriction. There's more. There's going to be more drag on the outer wall of a curved runner. Will runner length have the same effect on turbo engine power range, the same as NA? Yes, it does. It has exactly the same. If you can run an NA motor, like look at the 5.3 stuff that I have up. If you can run an NA motor and then have exactly the same amount of boost at every RPM, the curve will be identical. It'll just be, if it's 7.5 pounds, it'll just be 50% up compared to what it was NA. But the shape of the curve, it will make peak power at the same RPM. All of that will be the same. You pull the 2.8 TBI S10 intake from the yard and adapted a carb to it. Okay. Don't need to change the port shape. Isn't the cathedral port the shape of the port at the intake interface? I don't know. I thought you were talking about you're doing some kind of Rover engine or something. I ran an aluminum 5.3 combo at Pomona, and I need more power to go faster. What did it run, Travis? And what was the combination that you ran? I'm curious to see. I like getting, like track information on stuff. I think that's pretty cool. That's a good, add to, power. I do a lot of power testing, but it is cool to see it like applied to something. 1150s, nice. Up from 1157. The only change was 26-inch from a 28-inch. Okay. Richard, do you have any experience with variable Venturi carbs like SUs and Hitachis? Yeah, I ran a bunch of them on mostly Nissans that I did back in the day. And you can make them work fairly well. There's some really good videos up on SUs and Hitachis on guys making pretty good power with them. If you do a search for those, they will be up there. I think it's a lot of work to get them to make the power, unless you're using 3 of them on a Z, for instance. And it's hard to argue with how well side draft or Webers or Mercunis look. I had a 05 Chevy Malibu with the 3.5. Apparently, it's the evolution of the 2.8. Let's see. Overly, let's see. What was your question beforehand? I was referring to an intake runner light change. Yeah, it does the same thing. If you look at the test I did on the high RAM versus the low RAM, it would do exactly the same thing under boost. Bone stock LM4. Wow. Dish piston, 706 heads, 229 cam, early LS1 intake. So not even the later, not even the good intake manifolds, 26-pound injectors. 100%. That's good. 25 degrees of timing. Do you have enough octane to run more timing? It should make more power at 29. I was cleaning up the garage today and found a box of SRT stuff for my neons. I have 2 locked up stock turbos. 2-piece 2.8 liter Edelbrock Torque 2 intake. BS, you didn't know that I was the guy that ran the Silver State? I put a 351 Cleveland Cobra Jet in my 79 Capri. Very nice. I like those. Full frame, 11-gallon tank. Hard to bring jerry cans to get across Nevada. Oh, you're keeping it there because you're out of injector. Can you raise the static pressure? Do you have an adjustable regulator? I have a box of bigger injectors, but only LS1 fits under the hood. 79 to 01 style, not the LS6. Yeah, you'd pick up a pretty good amount of power by going to a different intake manifold. That's for sure. I don't know if Precision still does rebuilds on the turbos or not. I don't know the last time I talked to anybody about rebuilding a turbo. I also need some help with a simple dry shot setup to finish my LS build. It's more of a wow factor, just like a 75 to 100 shot at the most. You're gonna have a hard time making it if it's a oh, you're gonna do a dry shot. So you're gonna do a single fogger then? I'm thinking like individual foggers. I'm like, you're gonna have a hard time getting it down to 100 horsepower with 8 foggers. Yeah, Dan, I don't know. I don't remember the last time I asked anybody to rebuild a turbo. Usually you just, if you had one that went bad, you just go get another one. I'd rather swap the entire long block to a better flat top floating pin combo than swap manifolds. Several in my garage. Yeah, but even if you increase the compression, you're still going to be limiting stuff with that intake manifold. I have a low ram waiting for it. I bet if you put a low ram on it, it goes slower. Can you add nitrous and nitro through the foggers? Couldn't you do that? Couldn't you use nitromethane as your fuel additive? What octane is nitromethane? Is it pretty high? And are you getting fuel enrichment by doing that? The scuba bottle supercharger, yeah, the cold air supercharging. That thing makes impressive power. I mean, it's a lot of stuff going on, but being able to outsource the tank filling is nice because you don't have any parasitic loss, any losses associated with that thing. CR, we've done that. We've drilled into the throttle body. We've drilled into the tubing in front of the throttle body. We drilled into a spacer behind the throttle body. You can do all that stuff. If I can find a cheaper LS6 manifold, yeah, that would be good. It would definitely make more power. I had an 83 Turbo Coupe 2.3 factory turbo rebuilt locally. The guys from Turbo City used to do all that back in the day, but they're long gone. I don't think a nitromethane has a real octane rating. Yeah, I was wondering because if you're using the nitromethane as your extra fuel for the nitrous. I don't know how I'm not sure about the science behind that. The Dorman LS2 is like $800 now. Yeah, you could thank somebody for doing stories on that thing. Knucklehead YouTube guys. I think I have some Dorman intakes. I need to look at my storage thing. I know I have a truck one. Yeah, nitro brings its own oxygen. I know. So the nitrous oxide's bringing extra oxygen. The nitromethane's bringing extra. All the oxygen's come into play. Interesting 5.3 manifold swap videos. I've tested a lot of manifolds. What could possibly go wrong? Exactly. We have all the oxygen. Now, what's that other thing that we need? Yeah, we have air. Now, what's that other thing? BS. If you're going to try to make peak torque at 1500 RPM, which I don't recommend, you're going to have really, really long runners. The boost will be irrelevant if you're designing the motor to make peak power or peak torque at 1500 RPM. The fact that it has boost is not going to make any difference. Oh, not peak, just lots. Okay, that's a different thing. Yeah, because peak torque at 1500 is a really long manifold, especially on a small displacement motor like that. You're going to make lots of torque if you have boost at 1500 anyway. If you have boost at 1500, you're going to make torque. And on that note, guess what? Yeah, Dan, there's still lots of goodness going in there. .3 liter T-Bird turbo coupes. Yeah, those are cool. And on that note, it's time to go, but I will be back tomorrow. So I'll see you guys all tomorrow.